just move this up a little bit. Well, thank you for inviting me to talk about my favorite topic, sleep. But I do hesitate a little bit because I have to go back to a teaching commitment just afterwards. I was slotted in just after lunch, and many of you who know about circadian rhythms will be aware of the post-lunch dip in alertness. Even though you've loaded up on some caffeine, probably you'll still have a tendency to drift off. But if I see you, I'll call upon you and ask you what I was talking about, just to demonstrate that when you do fall asleep, you do lose contact with the external world. But the post-lunch dip today is combined with the 1st of April. So this is a very ominous time to give a talk. Sleep obviously has a strong impact on our lives, which many of you are aware of just from personal experience, I imagine. But just how does it do that? Probably the two main ways in which it impacts upon us are people who don't have difficulty sleeping. In fact, they fall asleep pretty quickly and don't wake up much during the night, so they have nothing to complain about their sleep quality, except they don't get enough sleep. And that's because they're shortchanging their sleep. They're giving it a lower priority. They're staying up too late and have to wake up too early in the morning. Many of you probably fit into this category. So what sort of impact does it have upon your life to do that? Up until fairly recently, I guess most people felt that, well, it does have an impact a little bit. You might feel the post-lunch dip more strongly, perhaps, as a result of that. You might drift off in meetings a little bit more frequently, but otherwise, what's the problem? Well, drifting off and falling asleep can have a fairly significant impact, particularly if you're driving a car late at night and you haven't been getting enough sleep night after night. There are a lot of fatal accidents on the roads as a result of falling asleep. Most of the country road fatal accidents are in fact due, most likely, are single car accidents and due to falling asleep. But of course, none of us do that, do we? No. I think actually a survey has been done that has found that the majority of people actually report that they have at times been driving and fighting off sleep and just drifting into sleep before pulling over or getting out of the car and stretching. They'll try countermeasures before that, but those don't usually work for very long. So a lot of us have played around with the possibility of death like that, and it happens a lot of the time. So that's one of the major impacts. But more recently, epidemiological research suggests that shortchanging your sleep on a regular basis, getting less than 6 hours of sleep on a regular basis, does have some risk factors. Mortality risk is increased somewhat, and cardiovascular disease, obesity, and a few other health problems are increased by shortchanging your sleep on a regular basis. The other impact, of course, if you have difficulty sleeping, and there are two major sleep disorders, insomnia, which is the most common, and sleep apnea. It's up there pretty much equal with insomnia. Sleep apnea, you may realize, is a cessation of breathing that takes place as you fall asleep. There are some good diagnostic procedures to detect that, a lot of clinical symptoms. If you're a heavy snorer when you sleep, particularly if you're witness to stop breathing on occasions, and then start breathing with gasping sort of noises. And if you're sleepy during the day, very sleepy during the day, then you probably have sleep apnea and should get it diagnosed, because there's some good treatments for it now, and with compliance with the treatments, usually corrects that problem. Insomnia is a little bit more complex to deal with. It can be dealt with, and I'll discuss that a little bit more today. But the consequences of those two sleep disorders are somewhat different. With sleep apnea, it's daytime sleepiness, which is the main thing, and some increased risk cardiovascular disease. With insomnia, daytime sleepiness is very rare. Insomniacs tend to be fatigued. They'll say they're tired, but what they mean really is they feel exhausted and fatigued, but not sleepy. They can't fall asleep easily, even during the day and especially at night. But they suffer distress during the day, fatigue feelings, emotional lability, and generally lowered quality of life. So it does have an impact, and people with insomnia will eventually end up trying to get some treatment or treat it themselves. Quite often over-the-counter preparations with promises of sleep from health food shops, perhaps preparations that on the most part don't have any evidential support for them. Or alcohol, which is a sedating drug, but if it's used night after night, then that causes its own problems, which most of you are aware of. But not only does it have personal costs, but it has an economic burden on society too. Recent estimates of the cost to Australia per year is about $5 billion. That's direct financial costs, but there are probably other downstream costs from that as well. So how common are these sleeping problems? Just recently we carried out a survey sponsored by the Sleep Health Foundation, provided the money, and then we had Rory Morgan, a survey research company, carried out a telephone survey amongst the population across Australia. So all urban and rural areas were covered, all different age groups are covered. 1,500 in the sample, a pretty good response rate, about 70%, with a margin of error about 2%. So the percentages I'll show you are probably pretty close to being reliable. So here are some of the results of that. We looked at a variety of different sleeping difficulties, and we took a look at people who reported having this difficulty at least 3 times a week or more frequently than that. And so these percentages are people who frequently report these problems, and I've broken it down by age so that to give you some good idea about how that varies across age. Difficulty falling asleep is more a problem in the younger age groups. And as you look at the older age groups, that difficulty tends to drop off. However, waking during the night is more common in the older age groups. And waking up too early is pretty evenly distributed across age. Waking feeling unrefreshed, however, is more common in the younger age groups, and particularly middle age groups. And then it tends to drop off with age, which is sort of interesting. And getting adequate sleep, the same sort of pattern. In the younger age groups, and particularly middle age groups, feel like they're the least satisfied by their sleep. And in the older age groups, they look like they are more likely to get satisfactory sleep for themselves. Then we also asked them, how much sleep do you normally get, both on week nights and on weekend nights. It's probably better to take a look at a figure plotting these things across age group, which is shown you here. As you can see in the dotted lines are weekend reports, usually more sleep on the weekends than on weeknights. But that's not true for all the groups. It's sort of interesting that this young age group here, 18 to 24, there's not that typical difference of getting more sleep on the weekend than on weeknights. We puzzled for that for a while because our main image was, here you have young adults who are probably doing too much in their lives and not getting enough sleep, particularly on weeknights, and so they build up a real sleep debt and sleep pressure. How do they pay off that sleep debt? How do they catch up on their sleep? Sleeping in on the weekends would seem to be the obvious answer to that, and a lot of more middle-aged people do that on a regular basis. We couldn't figure out why they would get actually no more sleep on the weekend. And I think it's probably because in this age group, I mean, some of you might have a guess at this. We were just guessing as well, because we weren't able to ask further questions about, well, what are you doing on the weekend nights? They're probably staying up very late, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and which means that, yes, they'll sleep in late in the morning, but they won't actually probably get much more sleep on the weekend as a result of the decision to party on Friday and Saturday nights. Again, this is just speculation. The other group that seems to have an equal amount of sleep on the weekends and weeknights is this older age group. And that's not surprising, I guess. After you retire, the weekends are pretty much like the weeknights. There isn't that sort of social change between work schedule and weekend relaxation schedule. But how does this compare with what people's sleep need? How much need they actually have for sleep? How many hours? This is a question that has perplexed the sleep community for a long time, and there's been fairly bitter sort of arguments about it. When we took the model of a good sleep to be that of a young, healthy adult, and noticed that the amount of sleep obtained in the older age groups was less, and sleep was more fragmented, more awakenings across the night. If a young adult got that sort of sleep, they would be suffering during the day. And so it was thought that sleep declines with age, but that's a handicap that older people then accrue. In other words, it's a pity that they can't get good sleep any longer, and that's obviously why they have a lot of medical problems and why they nap during the day and so forth. That model really has now been questioned by more recent evidence. which tried to determine the sleep need of both young people and older people. And how do you do that? Well, what they did was to allow them a virtually unlimited amount of time to sleep across the 24 hours. They were allowed 16 hours of time in bed with lights out, eyes closed, with just the attempt to sleep. Now, they're getting paid well for this, so they weren't bored with it. So they thought, so they didn't become too frustrated with it. And they were allowed this amount of sleep time night after night over a whole week. As it turns out, on the first couple of nights, or first couple of days of this unlimited sleep opportunity, both the older group and the younger group slept a lot more. And then the amount of sleep they obtained after about the third or fourth night plateaued out and stayed relatively stable from that point onwards. And that was deemed to be probably their sleep need. Sleep need in the sense that's how much sleep your sleep mechanism would take given an unlimited opportunity. And they did report feeling a little bit more rested and feeling a bit better than they normally do. The older group in their 60s and 70s were reporting on the average about 6.5 hours sleep and saying they felt pretty good, fine during the day. These are all healthy older people. The younger people, however, reporting sleeping 8 hours a night, and they reported feeling fine during the day as well. But given an unlimited opportunity, both groups slept about an hour more per night and felt a little bit better. So imagine what most of us probably do is we sacrifice that sort of last hour of sleep because we can't afford to spend another 4 hours of time in bed just to get that extra hour of sleep, which you'd have to do to get that extra hour of sleep, because it's not worth that much more for the time that you lose trying to get it. So that cost-benefit analysis means that most of us shortchange our sleep a little bit, but without too much harm or consequence. So this study found that the young people, in fact, got about 9 hours of sleep, looks like their sleep need, and the older group got about 7.5 hours of sleep under this unlimited sleep opportunity experiment. But you can see what the discrepancy is now between their reported sleep that they're actually getting and their so-called sleep need. We imagine there probably is a linear or sort of curvilinear relationship between the young people in their 20s and their older people in the 60s and 70s. So that sleep need looks like it declines about an hour and a half over a 50-year period. But the discrepancy with our survey results shows about an hour and a half sleep loss per night in the younger age groups, whereas in the older age groups, it's only perhaps about 20 minutes or so of less sleep than their actual sleep need. And so what are the daytime consequences of getting the amount of sleep that they're reporting? Well, you can see that we have 3 different measures: interfering sleepiness, fatigue or exhaustion, and feeling irritable or moody. And on all those measures, they tend to peak actually in the younger age groups and the middle age group, and then drop off in the older age group. So daytime consequences of their sleep shows less consequences really in the older age groups, which is consistent with the idea that they're probably getting closer to their actual sleep need. Now we can put together the newest definition of insomnia is not just do you have problems getting to sleep and staying asleep, but you really require daytime impairments as well. So people reporting fatigue, irritability, feeling inadequate sleep, and so forth. And so if we put together those sorts of questions with the questions about the sleep structure itself to get a measure of insomnia, we get a figure somewhere around 7% of the general population. But the question now is, using that more refined definition of insomnia, not just sleep characteristics, but sleep characteristics plus daytime impairments, how does insomnia change across the age group? Well, it goes up actually and is highest in sort of the middle age group, and then it starts dropping. And that peak in the middle age group is probably mainly coming from the daytime consequences, not so much of difficulty sleeping, but just getting inadequate sleep. But it certainly is the case that with this definition of insomnia, we don't have a higher percentage of insomnia in the older age groups. However, take a look at now what percentage of this population were taking medications for sleep. Whoops, go backwards. And the highest prevalence of medication for sleep is in the older age groups. And this has been found in lots of surveys and has generally been reported in lots of different locations. So this appears to be the way that insomnia tends to be treated by medical practitioners. So if you eventually end up going to a doctor, what's the likely outcome of that for insomnia? A recent study, about 2,400 individuals in Sydney, presenting for a general medical practice and reporting insomnia as a symptom, as a diagnosis. It turns out that about 95% of those cases were prescribed medications for their sleep, which surprised us a lot because this is a fairly recent study, and it's been known for many years that there are problems with the medications for sleep, that there are other better ways to treat insomnia, but I think it probably indicates that medical practitioners are not in a good position to treat insomnia in any other way. They don't have the other tools. Maybe they're pressed for time. The other tools do take time, do take an understanding, and so perhaps these are some of the reasons that medications are the easiest way out. And sometimes, indeed, the patients will probably insist upon medications because they've heard of their effectiveness. Mainly they're benzodiazepines. Temazepam was the most commonly prescribed medication. However, none of these medications really is problem-free, and none of them cure insomnia. They only work during the period of time that they're actually being taken. Now, you've probably seen curves like this before. We have long-acting medications and short-acting medications. The long-acting medications might have half-life of 24 hours, which means they're not cleared out of the system in 24 hours. They're just down to 50% concentration at their maximum. And so the next night you take another tablet, you add on to 50% of what's left from the previous one, and it tends to accumulate, and blood concentrations of medication tend to increase over time. So the medications in your system virtually all the time, more so at nighttime, but still across the day. So diazepam, nitrazepam, and some of the antidepressants. The advantage of that is if you want to withdraw from those medications, it's a little bit easier to withdraw. You don't have such severe withdrawal symptoms because basically once you stop taking it, then the medication washes out of your system slowly, so it puts you on to something like a gradual withdrawal system in effect. So the withdrawal effects the first night or two are not nearly as strong as from short-acting drugs. The disadvantage, of course, is that the drug's in your system most of the time, even across the day, and can result in sedation, slowed reactions, balance problems, and a number memory deficits. Most of these deficits are the same type of deficits that are shown with normal aging effects, and it's sort of ironic that prescription medications increases with age. We haven't done a study to determine this, but if you asked me how much is a person cognitively aged as soon as they're put onto a benzodiazepine, there would be a way of trying to measure this, but they would obviously be cognitively aged by the injection of benzodiazepines into their system. The short-acting drugs, temazepam, oxazepam, triazolam, and the new Z drug, zolpidem, for example, the main advantage is that there's very little daytime sedation, but the main disadvantage is drug dependency and tolerance effects. So that if you withdraw from these drugs, you experience not only a loss of the sleep that you had on drugs, but sleep that's sometimes worse than it was before you even started taking the drugs. Most of the benzodiazepines are also anxiolytic. So not only are you lying awake at nighttime on the first withdrawal night, but you're feeling anxious as well. It's a pretty aversive condition, and it's very difficult to get through that withdrawal process, unless it's a very gradual withdrawal, but then compliance with that's often difficult. So the person experiences such an aversion that they'll be back to the doctor, quite likely, and get another prescription. The other problems with medications, the symptomatic relief is not great. Physiologically, it increases total sleep time a little bit. Much of that's from the placebo effect anyway. It decreases slow wave sleep or delta wave sleep, the deeper sleep, and it decreases the rapid eye movement or dreaming sleep. It extends the sort of intermediate stage of sleep. So the actual sleep quality you get, even though the sleep time is a little bit longer, the quality is probably decreased. It's stretched out in a sense. So biologically, it probably doesn't represent very much improvement at all. Psychologically, it probably provides more relief because memory impairment means that the awakenings they do have across the night, they're less likely to remember. So they say, oh, I had a great solid sleep last night. In fact, the sleep wasn't that much different. And they only work when they're taken. So they don't cure the insomnia. They provide some symptomatic relief while you're taking them, but as soon as you stop, it's gone. But more recently, some of the companies have suggested, pharmaceutical companies have suggested, don't take them every night. Take them on alternate nights or when you need them, maybe 3 times a week or 4 times a week, or whatever. That makes some sense physiologically because it could sort of maintain sensitivity to some extent to the drug. But also what it results in is an alternation between good nights of sleep following the drug and poor nights of sleep following no drug, because the person's basically in a withdrawal. And so you build up a really strong perceptual contrast between those nights you do take the drug and the nights you don't. If you can suffer through 1 or 2 nights without the drug, then you're just aching to get back on the drug again on the 3rd night, and lo and behold, you get a better sleep. Partly because you have suffered some sleep loss on the previous 2 nights, and so you've built up some sleep drive, which is working for you anyway, and then you take the drug, and it just compounds and builds on that. But the net effect over a long period of time is a tremendous psychological contrast between the effectiveness of the drug, the times you take it, and how much you suffer when you don't take it. They're the ones that are very difficult to withdraw from drugs. As we know, sort of intermittent reinforcement is much more resistant to extinction than continuous reinforcement from a psychological point of view. So what alternative is there to medication? Well, we know there is a good alternative, cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia. And in CBT for insomnia, the emphasis really should be on the behavioral components, which we know consistently work effectively. The cognitive element of it is sort of like icing on the cake. It can be of some benefit, but it's not as reliable or consistent and dramatic as the behavioral. Some of the behavioral instructions like sleep rescheduling, bedtime restriction therapy over a period of 2 or 3 weeks until the sleep consolidates, and then you can then relax the time in bed a little bit more. Quite often insomniacs spend too much time in bed in an attempt to eke out a little bit more sleep, but what that does is really result in more time awake, lying in bed feeling frustrated and anxious that you're awake. And sleep education, in the broad sense, is part of the cognitive therapy. And let me just give you a little bit of recent research of our own, which attempted to see what are people's concepts of a good, healthy sleep for a young, healthy young adult. And we gave them a chart on which they could draw their concept of sleep across the normal night for a young, healthy adult. And what they drew was something like this sort of long valley of unconsciousness. You drift down into deep sleep, you're in deep sleep for several hours, then you gradually drift into lighter sleep and then wake up. So 70% of the population has this. Another 20% has an image where there's a little bit of fluctuation at the bottom, but none of them really reported an awakening out of sleep as being part of a normal, healthy sleep pattern. And it's even built into our culture, into our language. You ask a person, how'd you sleep last night? Oh, terribly. I had a broken sleep. Broken, as if you had a twig. You sort of broke it and destroyed it and damaged it in some way. So we see that broken sleep as being pathological. The general population do. Probably a lot of medical practitioners do as well. However, unfortunately, this is not the way sleep really operates across the night. Okay, so here's the concept that most people have, and what we have instead is this roller coaster affair down into deep sleep over a period of an hour, but then back into light sleep spontaneously after about an hour and a half. And then another sleep cycle, down into deep sleep, back into light sleep. Most of the deep sleep occurs early in the night, but towards the end of the night, sleep is generally lighter, and coming back into light sleep, you're very likely to wake up, even very briefly. So this is an example of a healthy young adult experiences a couple of brief awakenings across the night, and that has no impairment on their daytime functioning. So awakenings even occur in children and adolescents. They simply don't remember the awakenings. But as we get older, those awakenings get a little bit longer and a little bit more frequent and common, so people start perceiving that they woke once or twice, maybe even 3 times across the night. And how do they respond to that? Well, if you're being told at the same time that you should be getting 7 or 8 hours of solid sleep, that is the gold standard for a young, healthy adult, then there's dissonance there. There's potential for worry and the potential for developing insomnia. So, sleeping difficulties are highly prevalent in our population. And daytime distress, probably inadequate sleep, is highest in those sort of middle-aged groups. And even though sleep becomes more fragmented with age, insomnia in terms of daytime impairments doesn't actually increase much with age. But these sleep symptoms of broken sleep are treated as insomnia and very often treated with medications, probably inappropriately and unnecessarily. Instead, cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia provides a long-term treatment for insomnia. It carries on beyond the period of treatment, and so often people will have good sleep then for years afterwards. And they're also given the tools to manage their own sleep. They can go through the same procedures later on themselves and improve their sleep. Okay, thanks very much.